Montana Territory, 1882. The winter winds howled across the rolling plains like hungry wolves, carrying the promise of a bitter season. Pearl Valentine stood at the window of her small cabin, watching snowflakes dance in the fading light. At 21, she had already learned that the frontier gave nothing freely. It took and took until a person had nothing left to give. Her slender fingers, calloused from years of hard work, traced the frost patterns on the glass as she tucked a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. "This land is no place for dreams," she whispered to herself, a mantra she had repeated since her parents' wagon had rolled into the valley 3 years prior. Her father had succumbed to fever that first winter, her mother following him to the grave 6 months later. Now Pearl tended their small homestead alone, convinced that solitude was safer than the pain of attachment. The blue calico dress she wore had once been her mother's, taken in at the waist and shoulders to fit her smaller frame, a constant reminder of what the frontier could take. 3 miles away, Beau Sullivan hunched against the cutting wind, his horse struggling through deepening snow. At 25, he'd spent 7 years driving cattle across 4 territories, sleeping under stars that offered no comfort and working for men who valued his strong back but never his name. His handsome face was wind-chapped, his light brown hair too long under his hat, but his eyes remained clear and determined despite the exhaustion weighing on his broad shoulders. "Just a little further, Dash," he murmured to his horse, though he had no idea where further might lead them. The blizzard had caught him off guard, separating him from the cattle drive heading south. His canteen was empty, his provisions gone, and the temperature dropping faster than the sun. Beau had long believed that a man was meant to make his own way in this world, that depending on others was a weakness he couldn't afford. The West had taught him that lesson through hunger, betrayal, and too many unmarked graves. His teeth chattered as darkness fell completely. The small light in the distance was probably just his imagination, a cruel trick of hope that would lead nowhere. Still, with no alternatives, he guided Dash toward it. Pearl was stoking the fire when she heard it, the weak pounding at her door nearly lost beneath the howl of the wind. She reached for her father's rifle, her heart pounding. Visitors were rare in good weather and unheard of in storms like this. "Who's there?" she called out, voice steady despite her fear. "Please," came the reply, barely audible. "My horse." "The storm." Something in that voice, its raw desperation, made Pearl lower the rifle and slide back the heavy wooden bar. The door burst open with a gust of snow and wind, and with it came a man who seemed more dead than alive, collapsing to his knees on her threshold. "Good Lord," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. His lips were blue, his face nearly frozen. "Can you stand the fire? You need to get warm." Beau could barely focus on the woman before him, registering only the gentle hands helping him rise and the blessed heat of the hearth she guided him toward. His fingers were too numb to unfasten his coat, and she worked quickly to remove it along with his frozen boots. "I'm sorry," he managed through chattering teeth. "I saw the light." "My horse is outside." "I'll tend to him after. I'm sure you won't freeze to death," Pearl replied, wrapping her quilt around his shoulders. It was her mother's work, every stitch a memory, and the only beautiful thing she still possessed. "Drink this," she commanded, pressing a cup of hot coffee into his trembling hands. The liquid burned his throat in the best possible way. "Thank you, miss. I'm Beau Sullivan. I was with the Marshall outfit, driving cattle to Wyoming when the storm hit." "Pearl Valentine." She moved to the window, squinting into the darkness. "Your horse won't survive out there. I'll bring him to the lean-to." Before Beau could protest, she had donned her father's heavy coat and disappeared into the whiteout. He tried to rise, instinct telling him to help, but his legs buckled beneath him. 10 minutes passed before the door opened again, admitting Pearl and a blast of frigid air. "He'll live," she said simply, hanging up the coat. "Though he's nearly as frozen as you are." "You shouldn't have." "Let a good horse die?" She raised an eyebrow. "That would be poor Christian charity, Mr. Sullivan." Despite his condition, Beau felt the corner of his mouth lift. "Just Beau, please." Something passed between them then, a moment of recognition, perhaps, of two souls accustomed to standing alone. Pearl broke the silence. "You should sleep. The storm won't let up before morning." She prepared a pallet near the fire, using every blanket she could spare except one, the quilt now wrapped around Beau's shoulders. It was a sacrifice that didn't go unnoticed, though neither mentioned it as he gratefully stretched his tall frame on the makeshift bed. Pearl retreated to her own small cot on the other side of the cabin, shivering beneath her shawl but determined not to show it. As sleep finally claimed her, she wondered at the strange twist of fate that had brought a half-frozen cowboy to her door on the coldest night of the year. Morning arrived with unnatural stillness, the storm having exhausted itself sometime before dawn. Beau awoke to find Pearl already moving about the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing a modest breakfast of cornmeal mush and dried apples. "Your color's better," she observed, passing him a steaming bowl, "though you should stay put today. The drifts will be waist-high." Beau sat up, his muscles protesting. "I've imposed enough, Miss Valentine. The drive will be waiting on me, and they'll assume you took shelter somewhere," she interrupted. "Unless you fancy being buried in a snowdrift, you're not leaving today." There was something in her practical tone that brooked no argument, reminding Beau of his mother long ago. He nodded, accepting the bowl with a grateful smile. "Then I insist on earning my keep. There must be chores that need doing." Pearl hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to accepting help, having learned to rely solely on herself. "The lean-to roof needs shoring up," she admitted finally, "and the chicken coop wants mending, but only if you're truly recovered." They fell into an easy rhythm over the next 2 days. Beau repaired the lean-to and reinforced the chicken coop, split enough firewood to last a month, and even managed to track and shoot a deer, providing meat that Pearl carefully preserved. For her part, Pearl found herself smiling more than she had in years, discovering unexpected pleasure in having someone to cook for, to talk with during the long evening hours. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, Beau studying a worn map and Pearl mending a shirt, he broke the companionable silence. "Why are you out here alone?" The question had been on his mind since that first night. "It's a hard life for anyone, but especially." A woman, there was no rancor in her voice, only weariness. She set down her needle. "My parents died. The land is mine now. Where else would I go?" "Relatives back east. A town with proper society." Pearl shook her head, honey blonde hair catching the firelight. "There's nothing for me in those places. This cabin, this land, it's all I have left of them." Her blue eyes met his. "What about you?" "You must have people somewhere." Beau folded the map, a distant look crossing his features. "Not anymore. My father was a drunk who gambled away our farm in Tennessee. Mother died of heartbreak more than illness. My brothers scattered to the winds." He shrugged. "The trail's been my only home since I was 18. "That sounds lonely," Pearl said softly. "So does this," he replied, gesturing to the cabin. Neither spoke for a long moment, the crackling fire filling the silence with its whispers. "I should be able to leave tomorrow," Beau said finally. "The snow's packed down enough for Dash to manage." Pearl nodded, ignoring the sudden hollow feeling in her chest. "Yes, I suppose so." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Pearl packed him provisions, jerky, biscuits, and dried fruit, enough for several days' journey. "The Marshall outfit will be waiting at Fort Benson," she told him, securing the package to his saddle. "It's about 40 miles southeast." Beau mounted Dash, looking down at the woman who had saved his life. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning it to liquid gold beneath her woolen bonnet. Something twisted in his chest, an unfamiliar ache. "I can't thank you enough, Pearl Valentine," he said, her name feeling right on his lips. "You offered a stranger shelter when others wouldn't have opened their door." "Anyone would have done the same," she replied, though both knew that wasn't true. "Take this," he said suddenly, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a silver pocket watch. "It was my grandfather's. If ever you're in trouble or need help, take it to any cattle outfit and say it belongs to Beau Sullivan. They'll know how to find me." Pearl started to protest, but he placed it firmly in her hand, his fingers warm against her palm. "Please, it's poor payment for your kindness, but it's all I have of value." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Pearl thought he might lean down from his saddle. Instead, he straightened, tipped his hat, and turned Dash toward the open country. Pearl watched until horse and rider disappeared over the ridge, then returned to her empty cabin, the silver watch heavy in her pocket. Spring came slowly to the Montana territory, the land reluctantly surrendering to warmth after months of ice. Pearl found herself looking toward the southeastern horizon more often than she cared to admit, wondering where Beau Sullivan drove his cattle now, whether he remembered the snowbound days they'd shared. She told herself it was foolish, that brief encounters on the frontier meant nothing. People passed through, they didn't stay. The pocket watch remained on her mantle, untouched but not forgotten. May brought its own challenges. Pearl's small herd of cattle needed moving to summer pasture, a task she'd managed alone before but found daunting after a winter that had depleted her strength. She was attempting to herd the stubborn animals when 3 riders appeared on her property, rough men with hard eyes. "Well, well," called the largest of them, a bearded man with a scar bisecting his left cheek. "Ain't you a pretty little thing to be out here all alone?" Pearl's hand moved to the rifle slung across her back. "This is private property. State your business or move along." The men exchanged amused glances. "Now, don't be unfriendly," said the scarred man, dismounting. "We're just looking for hospitality. Maybe some food, a place to rest our horses." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, "perhaps some company." "I've nothing to offer," Pearl replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The next homestead is 10 miles east." The man took a step closer. "That's not very neighborly. Maybe we should teach you some manners." Pearl raised her rifle in one fluid motion. "Maybe I should teach you about trespassing laws in the territory." The situation might have ended there had the third man not circled behind her on horseback, knocking the rifle from her hands with a swift blow. Pearl stumbled back, falling hard as the men laughed. "Search the cabin," ordered the scarred man. "Take anything worth taking." Pearl fought as they dragged her toward the house, managing to land a solid kick to one man's shin before receiving a backhanded blow that sent her sprawling. Inside, they ransacked her few possessions, breaking her mother's dishes and tearing open the flour sack, sending white powder billowing across the plank floor. "Nothing worth a damn," complained one man, appending her trunk of clothing. The scarred man pulled Pearl to her feet by her hair. "Maybe the only value here is you, girl. How about we take you along? Might fetch something in the mining camps." It was then that his gaze fell on the mantelpiece and the silver pocket watch gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the window. He released Pearl to snatch it up. "Well, now this is something," he muttered, turning it over. "Fine craftsmanship, where'd a little nothing like you get such a prize?" Pearl said nothing, her split lip throbbing, but her eyes burned with defiance. "No matter," he shrugged, pocketing the watch. "It's mine now." They left her bound to a chair, taking her 2 best horses, what little money she had saved, and the precious watch. Pearl worked for hours to free herself, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. By nightfall, she had managed to loosen the ropes enough to escape, but the damage was done. Without horses, she couldn't pursue them. Without money, she couldn't replace what was stolen. But it was the watch that haunted her, Beau's trust, his gesture of protection, now in the hands of men who would sell it for whiskey money. 3 weeks later, Beau Sullivan sat at a rough table in a Fort Benson saloon, sharing a drink with the trail boss as they prepared for the next drive north. His winter adventure was a distant memory now, though sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, he found himself thinking of a small cabin and the woman who had shared her last blanket with a stranger. The saloon doors swung open, admitting a gust of warm June air and a travel-worn figure that made several heads turn. Beau's glass paused halfway to his lips as Pearl Valentine strode in, her blue dress dusty from the road, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her gaze swept the room with determination until it landed on him. "Pearl," he stood, unable to hide his shock, "what in heaven's name?" She crossed to him in swift strides, ignoring the curious glances. "Your watch was stolen," she said without preamble. 3 men came to my homestead. They took it along with my horses and savings." Only then did Beau notice the fading bruise along her jawline and the small cut at the corner of her mouth. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "They hurt you," he said quietly. "I'm fine," she dismissed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "But I remembered what you said, that any cattle outfit would know how to find you." The general store owner in Hollow Creek pointed me toward Fort Benson. "You came all this way about a watch," the trail boss interjected, giving Pearl an appraising look. "I came because I made a promise to keep it safe," she replied firmly. "And because men like that don't stop at one homestead, they'll keep preying on isolated folks until someone stops them." Beau's hand closed over hers where it rested on the table. "Sit down, Pearl. Tell me everything about these men, every detail you can remember." Over the next hour, Pearl described her attackers, their horses, even peculiarities of speech that might identify them. The scarred leader she remembered all too well. "That's Harlan Dobbs," said the trail boss grimly. "Him and his boys have been troubling this territory for 2 seasons now. Word is they hole up in an abandoned mining camp in the Judith Mountains between jobs." "Then that's where we're going," Beau said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The trail boss sighed. "We push off for the North Range in 3 days, Sullivan. You're my best man. I can't spare you for a personal vendetta." Beau's jaw tightened. With respect, sir, I'm going whether you spare me or not. This lady helped me when I was half dead in a blizzard. I owe her. Pearl started to protest, but Beau silenced her with a gentle squeeze of her hand. To her surprise, the trail boss laughed. I had a feeling you'd say that. Fine then. Take Fisher and Martinez. They've been itching for something more exciting than watching cow rumps. But be back in 5 days or find yourself another outfit to ride with. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As the trail boss left them, Beau turned to Pearl. You shouldn't have made this journey alone. It's dangerous country between your homestead and here. I managed, she replied, lifting her chin, and I'd do it again. That watch was your trust, Beau. I couldn't let them take it without at least trying to make it right. Something shifted in Beau's expression, a softening around the eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. You are something else, Pearl Valentine. Is that good or bad? She asked, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. That, he said, standing and offering her his arm, remains to be seen. Now let's find you a proper meal and a safe place to rest while I gather the men. The following morning, Pearl awoke in the small boarding house to find Beau and 2 other cowboys preparing horses in the yard below. She hurried downstairs, her carpet bag in hand. I'm coming with you, she announced, approaching the men. Beau looked up from adjusting his saddle, disbelief clear on his face. That's out of the question. We're tracking dangerous men into rough country. They're my horses they stole, my money. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Your watch that I lost, I have every right to see this through. It's too dangerous, Pearl. These aren't men who show mercy. I know exactly what kind of men they are, she said, the bruise on her face testament to her words. And I'm not asking permission, Beau Sullivan. I'm telling you I'm coming along. The 2 cowboys, Fisher, a weathered man with kind eyes, and Martinez, younger and quick to smile, exchanged glances of mingled admiration and amusement. She's got grit, Sullivan, Fisher remarked. Might be useful to have someone who can identify these fellows without question. Beau ran a hand through his hair in frustration. And if there's trouble? If bullets start flying? Then I'll take cover like anyone with sense, Pearl replied calmly. I'm not helpless, Beau. I've lived alone on the frontier for 3 years. He studied her face, seeing the determination there, and knew further argument was pointless. Fine, but you stay behind us, follow orders without question, and if I say run, you run. Understood. Pearl nodded, satisfaction lighting her features. Perfectly. They rode out within the hour, Pearl mounted on a sturdy mare borrowed from the livery. The journey to the Judith Mountains would take 2 days of hard riding, with the abandoned mining camp nestled deep in a narrow valley that had once yielded silver but now harbored only ghosts and outlaws. That night, camped beside a small creek, Pearl sat slightly apart from the men, listening to their quiet conversation. Martinez was telling a story about a cattle drive gone wrong, his hands gesturing animatedly in the firelight. Fisher occasionally corrected details with good-natured grumbles. It struck Pearl how different this was from her solitary evenings at the homestead, how alive it felt to be part of something, even temporarily. Beau approached, offering a tin cup of coffee. You should rest, he said, sitting beside her on the fallen log. Tomorrow will be another long day. I'm not tired, she lied, accepting the cup gratefully. The warmth seeped into her fingers. I was just thinking how strange life can be. If that blizzard hadn't hit when it did, if you hadn't seen my cabin light. We wouldn't be here now, Beau finished for her, chasing outlaws through the territory. No, I suppose not, she smiled faintly. I would still be alone, convinced that's how things should be. And is that how things should be, Pearl? His voice was soft, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I don't know anymore. For so long, I thought keeping to myself was safer, that if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't lose them like I lost my parents. The frontier takes, Beau agreed, but sometimes it gives too. Sometimes it brings people together who might never have met otherwise. Their shoulders were nearly touching now, and Pearl was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, reassuring, and increasingly necessary in a way that both comforted and terrified her. We should get some sleep, she said finally, setting down her empty cup. Like you said, tomorrow will be a long day. The next afternoon found them approaching the mining camp from the south, staying hidden among the pine trees that dotted the mountainside. Through Beau's field glasses, they could make out 3 cabins in various states of disrepair, a collapsed ore processing shed, and a corral containing several horses, including, Pearl noted with anger, her 2 bay mares. "That's them," she confirmed, pointing to the largest cabin. "Smoke from the chimney, and those are definitely my horses." Beau lowered the glasses, his expression grim. "I count at least 5 men moving around." "That's 2 more than you described." "Friends of theirs, likely," Fisher murmured. "Dobbs always did attract the worst sort." They retreated to a safe distance to formulate a plan. The direct approach was deemed too dangerous. They were outnumbered, and the outlaws would have the advantage of cover. "We wait until nightfall," Beau decided. "Fisher, you and Martinez circle around to the north side. I'll approach from here with Pearl staying well back in the trees. When you see my signal, 3 shots fired straight up, move in. Our goal is to recover what was stolen and bring Dobbs to justice if possible. No unnecessary risks." Pearl listened intently, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. This was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself, yet somehow it felt right, taking action rather than passively accepting loss as the frontiers do. As dusk fell, Beau turned to her. "Stay here," he instructed, securing his horse to a sturdy pine. "If anything goes wrong, if you hear sustained gunfire, ride back to Fort Benson. Don't try to help, don't be brave, just go." "I won't leave you," she said firmly. "Pearl." "No," she placed a hand on his arm. "I didn't cross half the territory to abandon you now. I'll stay out of sight, but I won't run." Their eyes locked in silent battle, neither willing to yield. Finally, Beau sighed. "You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Pearl Valentine." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied, the corner of her mouth lifting. "It wasn't meant as one," he grumbled, but there was no real annoyance in his tone. Darkness settled over the mountain like a heavy blanket. Pearl watched as Beau melted into the shadows, moving silently toward the camp. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she strained to see any movement in the gloom. The occasional burst of raucous laughter from the cabin was the only indication of life. Then came the sound she'd been dreading, a shout of alarm followed by the crack of a gunshot. Not Beau's signal, but a warning cry from the camp. Someone had spotted them. More shots rang out, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the scene. Pearl could make out figures moving, taking cover, returning fire. Her grip tightened on the reins of her horse, every instinct screaming at her to do something, anything. From her vantage point, she could see that Fisher and Martinez had been pinned down behind an old ore cart, unable to advance or retreat without exposing themselves to fire from the cabin. Beau was nowhere in sight. Making a split-second decision, Pearl mounted her horse and circled wide around the camp, keeping to the trees. If she could create a distraction from another direction, it might give Fisher and Martinez the opening they needed. She had no weapon save a small knife tucked in her boot, but she had something else, the element of surprise. Reaching the corral where her horses were kept, Pearl slipped from her mount and approached the crude gate. The animals were nervous, sensing the tension and gunfire nearby. She worked quickly to unlatch the gate, whispering soothing words to her own mares who recognized her scent and voice. With a swift movement, she threw the gate wide and slapped the nearest horse hard on its flank. The animal bolted, startling the others into motion. Pearl leapt clear as the entire herd stampeded through the opening, straight through the center of the camp. The sudden thunder of hooves created exactly the chaos she'd hoped for. Men scattered to avoid being trampled, their attention diverted from the gunfight. Pearl used the confusion to dash toward the largest cabin, keeping low and using the stampeding horses as cover. Inside, she found evidence of hasty departure, playing cards scattered across a table, half-empty bottles of whiskey. A quick search revealed a small box containing what she recognized as her savings, along with other valuables likely stolen from other homesteads. But the pocket watch was nowhere to be found. A noise at the door made her whirl around. Harlan Dobbs stood in the entrance, his scarred face twisted with rage, his gun trained on her heart. "You," he snarled. "The little homesteader with more courage than sense. Came for your trinkets, did you?" Pearl stood her ground, though fear coursed through her veins like ice water. "Where is the watch?" Dobbs laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "That pretty silver thing, why, I'm keeping that for myself." He patted his vest pocket. "Turns out it's worth more than I thought, some fancy Eastern craftsmanship. Too good for trail trash like your cowboy friend out there." "He's not trash," Pearl said, her voice steady despite her terror. "He's worth 10 of you." "Well, he'll be dead soon enough," Dobbs sneered. "My boys have him and his friends cornered, and then it'll be just you and me deciding what you're worth." The sound of a gun being cocked came from behind Dobbs. "I wouldn't count on that," said Beau's voice, cold as winter steel. Dobbs froze, his eyes widening slightly. "Sullivan should have known you'd come crawling back for your woman." "Drop the gun," Beau ordered. Slowly. For a moment it seemed Dobbs might comply. Then, with lightning speed, he lunged toward Pearl, grabbing her arm and yanking her in front of him as a shield, his pistol pressed to her temple. "Back off, Cowboy, or she gets a bullet right here and now." Pearl could feel Dobbs's breath hot against her neck, his arm like an iron band across her chest. She caught Beau's eye, saw the barely contained fury there, and something else. Something that looked remarkably like fear, not for himself but for her. "Let her go, Dobbs," Beau said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is between you and me." "I don't think so," Dobbs replied. "I think I'll be leaving with the girl and whatever else I want. You'll stand aside if you value her life." Pearl felt the pressure of the gun barrel against her skin, but oddly her fear was receding, replaced by a calm clarity. She remembered the knife in her boot if she could just reach it. "Your men have surrendered," Beau continued, taking a careful step forward. "Fisher and Martinez have them contained. It's over, Harlan." Dobbs's grip tightened painfully. "Stay back." In that moment of distraction, Pearl made her move. She stomped hard on Dobbs's foot while simultaneously driving her elbow back into his stomach. The outlaw grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Pearl to twist away and drop to the floor. Beau fired in the same instant, his bullet catching Dobbs in the shoulder. The outlaw staggered back, his own gun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling before clattering to the floor. Beau was on him in seconds, driving him to the ground with a powerful blow to the jaw. "Pearl," he called out, not taking his eyes off Dobbs, "are you hurt?" She rose shakily to her feet. "No, I'm fine." She approached the subdued outlaw, reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the silver pocket watch. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, holding it out to Beau. Their eyes met over the fallen outlaw and something unspoken passed between them, relief, yes, but also recognition. Recognition of what they had risked for each other, of what that might mean. By dawn, Dobbs and his men were secured and ready for transport to the territorial marshal in Fort Benson. Pearl had recovered her horses and savings, along with possessions belonging to at least 3 other homesteaders who had been similarly victimized. As they prepared to depart, Beau approached Pearl where she stood adjusting her mare's saddle. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, leaning against a nearby post. "Releasing those horses, confronting Dobbs alone." "I couldn't just hide in the trees while you were in danger," she replied, not meeting his gaze. "Besides, it worked, didn't it?" This time, he stepped closer, gently turning her to face him. "Pearl, when I saw you in that cabin with Dobbs, his gun to your head," he trailed off, his normally confident voice uncertain. "I've never been so scared in my life." Beau Sullivan afraid. She teased lightly, trying to mask the flutter in her chest at his proximity. "I don't believe it." "Believe it," his hand moved to her cheek, thumb tracing the fading bruise with feather-light tenderness. "I've spent years convincing myself that a man in my position can't afford attachments, that the trail is no place for feelings," he swallowed hard. "I was wrong." Pearl's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when this is over, when we've delivered these men to justice, I'd like to ride back with you to your homestead. I'd like to help you rebuild what they destroyed." His eyes held hers, earnest and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "If you'll have me." For a moment Pearl couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotions she'd kept carefully buried for years. "What about your cattle drive, your job?" "There are other jobs, other cattle drives," he smiled faintly. "But there's only one Pearl Valentine." She looked up at him, this man who had stumbled half-frozen into her life, and somehow thawed something within her that she'd thought permanently frozen. "I think," she said slowly, "that my homestead could use a good hand. Someone who knows how to shore up linta roofs and mend chicken coops." His smile widened, lighting his entire face. "Is that a yes?" "It's a start," she replied, her own smile breaking through like sunshine after rain. 3 days later, having delivered Dobbs and his gang to justice in Fort Benson, Beau and Pearl rode side by side toward her homestead. Fisher and Martinez had returned to the cattle outfit with Beau's promise to join a future drive if they passed through the territory. The trail boss had grumbled about losing his best man, but ultimately wished him well, recognizing the look of a man who had found something worth more than wages. They traveled at an easy pace, in no hurry to reach their destination, savoring these days of discovery. Each evening by the campfire, they shared stories of their pasts, filling in the blank spaces of their histories. Pearl spoke of her parents' dreams for their Montana homestead, of her father's laughter and her mother's quilting. Beau described his childhood in Tennessee, his early days on cattle drives, the loneliness he'd never acknowledged until now. "I never thought I'd say this," Pearl admitted one night as they sat shoulder to shoulder beneath a canopy of stars, "but I'm almost grateful to those outlaws." Beau raised an eyebrow. "Grateful to Dobbs." She nodded, her honey-blonde hair glowing in the firelight. "If they hadn't stolen your watch, I would never have come looking for you. We might never have seen each other again." "I'd like to think I would have found my way back to you eventually," he said, taking her hand in his. "Some connections are too strong to ignore forever." "Is that what we have, a connection?" In answer, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as though he feared she might pull away. But Pearl responded with a certainty that surprised them both, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Beau pressed his forehead to hers. "I'd say that's definitely a connection, Miss Valentine." The homestead came into view the following afternoon, the small cabin nestled in its valley looking much as Pearl had left it. Yet somehow it seemed different to her now, no longer a place of isolation, but a place of possibility. They spent the remainder of spring and all of summer rebuilding what had been damaged, improving what could be improved. Beau proved as skilled with axe and hammer as he was with rope and saddle. Together they expanded the corral, reinforced the cabin's roof, and planted a larger vegetable garden than Pearl had ever managed alone. News of Dobbs's capture spread through the scattered homesteads, bringing occasional visitors with gratitude and friendship. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Pearl found herself part of a community, however dispersed it might be. As autumn approached, bringing cooler winds and golden light across the plains, Beau and Pearl sat on the porch steps watching the sunset. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him, as though they had sat this way for years rather than months. "Pearl," he said suddenly, shifting to face her, "there's something I need to ask you." She looked up at him, taking in the serious set of his features. "What is it?" From his pocket, he withdrew the silver pocket watch that had brought them together. "This was my grandfather's most prized possession. He gave it to me before he died, saying that someday I should pass it on to someone truly worthy." He placed it in her palm, closing her fingers over it. "I want you to have it, not to hold for me, but to keep." Pearl stared at the watch, then at Beau's face. "I don't understand." "I'm asking you to marry me, Pearl Valentine." His voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed his nervousness. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you right here, if that's what you want too." Tears filled Pearl's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, that's what I want too." Beau's face broke into the most radiant smile she had ever seen. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I promise you," he murmured against her hair, "you'll never be alone again." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Hollow Creek, with Fisher and Martinez riding 3 days to stand as witnesses. Pearl wore her mother's blue dress with wildflowers in her hair. Beau wore the only suit he owned, purchased years ago for a funeral, but now serving a happier purpose. That night, returning to their cabin as husband and wife, Pearl paused at the threshold. "Wait," she said, reaching into the pocket of her dress. She withdrew the silver pocket watch, its surface catching the last rays of sunset. "This belongs to both of us now, a symbol of how we found each other." Beau smiled, lifting her easily into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "You offered your last blanket to a freezing cowboy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and in return he offers you his forever." "Forever," Pearl repeated, her arms around his neck, her heart fuller than she had ever believed possible. "I think that sounds just right." As winter returned to the Montana territory, bringing with it the howling winds and heavy snows, the small cabin stood warm and steadfast against the elements. Inside, Beau and Pearl Sullivan faced the season not with dread but with joy, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other what the frontier so often denied its inhabitants: not just survival, but a true home.